Listen up, my friends. These 9 simple mistakes could be killing your great story. I'm XP Lovecat and I'm a developmental editor, and I see these mistakes all the time. It's really easy and natural to make these mistakes, so don't feel bad if you've made them yourself. Trust me, we've all made them. And they're even easy mistakes to fall back on, even if you're an experienced writer. So stick around to learn the most common mistakes that new writers make, or writers who are rushing through their draft and they fall back on these mistakes. Number 1 is lack of interiority. Interiority is a character's reflections, thoughts, and feelings. And if this isn't on the page, then there's a lack of emotional connection to your characters. Think about how books are different than any other media that we have. We get to see inside a character's head. Unlike a movie where you're just watching, this is something that you get to really know exactly how they're feeling because you're inside their head. So you'll want to make sure that you have these thoughts and feelings written on the page so that there is that reader experience and emotional connection. And if you want to learn more about writing characters that your readers will love, check out this video. So we're aiming to strike the balance between external events and the internal reactions to those events and how those events affect your character emotionally. Make sure to reveal their internal struggles, and you'll also want to call out if there's a difference between what they say and what they think. This is going to give your readers a better view of your character and have that connection to your book. Number 2, inconsistent characters. So this is when a character does something that is not in line with their motivation, not in line with their personality, or past actions. So if you've established a character and then they do something that's completely opposite of how they've been reacting up until this point, there's inconsistency there and it's jarring for the reader. It also just doesn't make logical sense. So to fix this, make sure that you do a lot of research on your characters and their personality types and how they would react in certain situations. You'll want to look out for this during the revision step to make sure that there's consistency with your characters' reactions and how they show up in the world. And the reason why this is so important is because it makes your characters believable to your readers. Number 3, too many characters or too many characters at once, or similar names of characters. Okay, so if you have a giant cast of characters, normally this would be reserved for a series. If you have a standalone book, you probably don't need that many characters because it can be confusing for the reader. And you want to make sure all your characters have a role in the story and that they're not just there to name drop their being characters. There's the assumption from the reader that there are other people in the world than the characters that you specifically name, so you don't need to name everyone. On that note, if you have a scene and you introduce 5 characters at once, that can be pretty overwhelming for the reader. They don't know enough about these characters for them to differentiate in their head, so then later when another name comes up, they don't know who that is. You will want to make sure that you're very careful about how many characters you introduce all in one scene so that they can maintain a sense of difference between those characters and keep them in their mind so they know who they are later in the story. And related to this is being careful about what you name your characters. If we have a Jack, John, and Jim all go into one secret meeting, it's going to be very difficult for me to remember, wait, was that Jack or was that Jim? So spend some time thinking about differentiating your names of your characters as well. Number 4 is head hopping. This one is pretty tricky, but head hopping is when you're writing in third person limited and you are going from one person's perspective to another person's perspective. So the key here is to know the difference between third person limited and third person omniscient. Third person omniscient is from the perspective of a narrator who knows all about these characters and their thoughts and feelings. An example of that is Dune here I have on the shelf. It's a book that has a narrator that knows all the thoughts and feelings and switches between those characters and being inside those different characters' heads. Whereas third person limited is written using the terms she, her, him, and those are still written in third person but is in one particular person's perspective. They can only see through that person's eyes. An example of that book would be Aragon here. So this is an example of third person limited. So to give you a really simple example of head hopping, we have Larry looked at the dilapidated castle and felt like he was transported back in time. Sarah saw how much Larry was enjoying looking at the castle. Okay, so back to back, we have Larry, who would be our limited perspective, looking and showing the feelings of this castle. And then all of a sudden we're in Sarah's head and Sarah is viewing Larry. So a good way to identify that this is a head hop is that Larry isn't able to see himself. You're going to only write what Larry can see and feel in his perspective as opposed to jumping to someone else. This can be a little bit of a tough concept to grasp. So reading a lot of different books in both third person omniscient and third person limited will give you a better sense of how to identify the difference. Number 5 is white room syndrome or floating heads. And what I mean by this is, let's say we have a dialogue scene happening between two characters and it's just characters going back and forth without ever having any description of the room or having any description of their actions and what they're doing with their body in between sentences of dialogue. So you want to have both description of where these people are and description of the actions that are happening because it grounds readers and makes it easier for them to picture the full scene. Instead of just seeing two heads talking back and forth, we have a more grounded idea of what this scene is supposed to look like. And we're able to picture that and have more details that flesh out this environment. And it's not just listening to two people talk. If you're enjoying this and want more fiction writing craft advice, hit that subscribe button. Number 6, trying to be too clever. And this is also called thesaurus writing. So this is when you take your natural writing style and you butcher it by going to the thesaurus and looking up these long words that you normally wouldn't use. It feels very unnatural and is just not going to read in an engaging way. So be yourself and don't feel like you have to prove anything with your writing. You don't need to be super clever, you just need to be who you are and your story is going to shine through with your personal unique voice. Number 7 is using an adverb plus a verb instead of just a stronger verb. An example of this is he quickly ran. Instead of quickly as our adverb and ran as our verb, we could say sprinted. This is a much more concise and detailed way to describe the action. Adverbs can be used in moderation, but you're going to want to look out for them if they show up a lot in your writing. Along these lines, you'll also want to look out for crutch words, which you can check out more details on in this video. Number 8 is describing everything. And what I mean by this is more of a play-by-play of someone's life. So for example, Susie went down the stairs, she opened the fridge, she took out the milk, she took off the cap of the milk, and then she poured it into her bowl, and then she forgot she didn't put the cereal in first, so then she went to the cabinet, and then she opened the cabinet, and then she put out the Cheerios, and then she opened the box of Cheerios, and you get the point. This is something that's not fun to read. We only want to know the very specific points that are engaging and relevant to the story. So if forgetting the Cheerios is very unlike Susie, then that is what we're going to highlight in that example. Susie went down the stairs and she was starting to prepare breakfast. She poured in the milk and realized she forgot the Cheerios. That was very unlike her because normally she's very organized and follows her routine. So she knew that she was off whack for that day. Something along those lines where you are highlighting why something specific is happening and why it's important to the protagonist in the story and not just giving us a play-by-play. And the final mistake I see is number 9, which is being too afraid to make mistakes. I'm going to bring up my Dune book here again, which is the quote, "Fear is the mind killer." At the end of the day, you are probably going to make mistakes. You're probably going to make some of the mistakes on this list, and that's okay. You need to get that first draft written because we can fix bad writing, but we can't fix writing that isn't written. So make sure that you don't spend too much time in over-analysis mode and you start practicing writing and you write more and more and more because that is how you're going to get better. Overthinking is going to slow or perhaps stop the process, so spend some time accepting that mistakes are how you learn and you're going to make them, and that's okay. Let me know in the comments which of these mistakes seem to creep into your writing most often. I hope that you found this video helpful. If you did, go ahead and like it. And thank you so much for watching. Happy writing.